came to printmaking through a new professor who had just arrived when I arrived my freshman year. His name was Jim Munson. And Jim Munson was an assistant for 8 years to Stanley William Hayter at Atelier 17 in Paris, which is really one of the most important 20th century printmaking workshops in the world. He sort of brought printmaking into more of a primary medium, where it had fallen in the 19th century into sort of a reproduction mode of other mediums. I received a grant to go and live in Paris for the year, and I worked with Hayter for a year. Atelier 17 was really known for intaglio techniques, etching, engraving, aquatint, and so that's what you focused on. And since that was my expertise when I started Center Street Studio, that's what my focus was here. So mostly in etching and aquatint projects, as well as some woodcut projects and a lot of monotype projects. Because after I returned from Paris in 1981, I went to live in New York City and to work as an artist, and had a job as an assistant to an art consultant. But I was applying for graduate school, so fortunately I got into graduate school at the art school at Yale, where I was able to study actually printmaking under Gabor Peterdy, who happened to work with Stanley William Hayter at Atelier 17 in Paris in the 1930s. And here I am coming from the 1980s, which is astounding. I think the time difference between us. And so I had 2 successful years there, and then as we were all graduating, we all had to decide what we were going to do in order to support ourselves as artists. Everyone was encouraged to apply for teaching jobs, which I did, and surprisingly received one. But while the decision process was being made, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife of 35 years, was attending a series of lectures at the Harvard GSD at the Graduate School of Design, and she came out of the lecture hall and saw a sign on the wall, one of those Xerox signs with a picture of this very press, with the little tear-off tabs of the phone number, "For sale, printmaking workshop, for details call." And so she thought that was hilarious. Someone's going to sell an entire workshop. So she pulled the whole thing down. None of the numbers had been taken. And she brought it back to New Haven. And she says, "If you're not going to get that teaching job, go buy a print shop." And so I said, "This looks interesting." I called the guy up. He tells me what he has. It's a pretty astounding space, $300 a month rent, beautiful press, set up, nice shop, beautiful views of Gloucester Harbor. We drove up that weekend, and I agreed to buy the press. In the 60s, and I think mostly in the 70s, there were a lot of prints being made that were more like reproductions, like offset lithographs of paintings that were being signed in limited editions of 1,000 or 2,000. And there was a reason for that, because there was, I think the tax structure was in place so that people can write off art as furnitures and fixtures for businesses, right? But they weren't really prints; they were reproductions. And I think in the late 70s and 80s, original printmaking started to have a little bit more interest and a little bit more energy being focused in. And there were a lot of shops starting to open up, larger shops. I mean, you had Pace Prints was making prints, and Crown Point Press was making prints, and Tamarind, Lithography Workshop. So these were the big shops that were really making, and also ULAE, of course, with making prints with Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns, and so that was like late 60s and 70s, where real printmaking was really happening. And I think that momentum helped carry me through in the early 80s, and helped me survive. I mean, I forget which year it is, I have to look, but we did a series, and it was when we were teaching at the Art Institute of Boston together in their graduate program, and invited her, and she was doing these, she does a lot of like flow paintings, she starts off the paintings by sort of flowing large fields of color. And so I figured, okay, let's have her paint directly on the press bed in a similar way to Marcus Lindenbrink, but much more specifically, and then we run paper through, and it's spread it out in these sort of unexpected ways. And after a while, she got very good at predicting how those big fields would move and what kind of shapes. And we would change the viscosities of the ink so that some of them would repel each other and things would move around each other. And then she wanted some hard elements in them as well. And so we decided, on the fly, I said, well, why don't we make some woodcut elements and print those. And so we got a bunch of plywood, and I started cutting the shapes. She would draw the shapes, I would cut them out, sand them down, and then we started inking those. But now to where to actually, how to register them, right? Typically you put the woodcut down, you put the paper down that, you don't see where it goes, you put it through and it prints it, right? We're doing it on a big press. Well, instead, I came up with the idea of putting these previously printed flow images of shapes facing up on the press, right? Putting the ink blocks, she can lay them down exactly where she wanted them on the sheet, upside down. We have two rails on the side of the press, that's the same height as the thickness as the blocks. When we run it through, the blocks get printed as it goes through the press exactly where she wants them. And then between those times, she would start drawing with graphite pencil directly onto each one of the prints. And then after that, we went and printed more woodcuts on top of that. It was this sort of really totally open-ended, and as we're doing them, we're clipping them up onto the wall back here behind me, and she's assessing what each thing needs, and she makes a decision. She wants a new shape. We cut a new shape, we ink it up, we roll it, we place it right down where she wants it to be. It was just this totally open, organic process. So, and that required, monotype and we had mono print elements, and it had direct drawing. That's really exciting stuff, right? Because John Wilson was the artist that won the competition to do the bronze sculpture of Martin Luther King that now is stands in the Capitol Rotunda in Washington. And in preparation for that, he did a series of studies, and one of which is in the Museum of Fine Arts Boston's collection. And it had been curated in a traveling exhibition called In the Spirit of Martin. It was sponsored by the Smithsonian. It was going to travel for, I think, a year. And they used John's drawing, this beautiful study of King, charcoal study, for their big catalog and all their advertising. And the MFA, they could only have the drawing for 3 months, which is their standard loan period, and there's no exceptions made. And so they used John's drawing for all of this material and advertising, and then it was going to be in several of the shows that it was going to travel to. So John mentioned that to me. We're working on another project, and I said, well, why don't you come and make an etching based on the drawing, and then you can replace the drawing with this etching. He came, and I assumed that the drawing was life-size, so I gave him a life-size copper plate, which is a challenge, and he started drawing. And it literally took us a month and 18 stages in order to get to a place where both the quality of the drawing and the likeness came together. I mean, early on we had a really beautiful etching, but the likeness was off. And then we got the likeness stronger, but the character of the drawing was off. And it didn't express how John wanted to express King in this particular print. So it's back and forth, and I was having to come up with, I have to etch it, and John would have to be scraping and burnishing and redrawing, and I know eventually when John was playing, it's a great photograph of him going like this in front of the plate saying, it's so damn big. And I said, well, John, the drawing is this large. He goes, no, the drawing is only about this big. It's like 16 by 20, and this is this enormous 40 by 30 inch plate. And so he struggled with the scale for that entire month. And it was finally that last week where he just was carefully scraping and burnishing it. I had to learn how to print it in order to achieve all that nuance that he'd actually done on the plate. And so the challenge of getting the plate to where it needed to be, and then the challenge of learning to print it consistently throughout the edition was huge on this print. It was, and Ison is probably I think the most beautiful print and the most historically important print to come out of Century Studio in the